The rain came down like it wanted to drown the whole city, and Ani was on her knees on wet pavement, wrapping her coat around a boy who wasn't hers, whispering words she didn't fully believe herself. "Don't tell me your name," she said, voice shaking as thunder cracked over Seoul. "Don't tell me anything. Whoever you're running from, I'm not asking. I'm just getting you dry." The boy said nothing. He only gripped her sleeve like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Somewhere behind them, tires screeched. Somewhere behind them, men were searching. And neither of them knew yet that this single act of kindness in the middle of a storm was about to collide with the most dangerous family in the country. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ani had learned a long time ago that Seoul did not care whether you belonged to it or not. The city moved fast, and if you were slow, it moved right over you. She was 26, Nigerian, and had come to South Korea 4 years earlier chasing a job contract that promised more than it delivered. She'd landed on her feet anyway, barely cleaning houses for families who barely looked at her twice, sending every spare one home to her mother in Lagos. That night, she had been walking home from her shift at the Han residence, cutting through the industrial district because it shaved 15 minutes off her route, when she heard crying beneath the overpass. She almost kept walking. God forgive her, she almost did. But the crying had a rawness to it, something that didn't sound like a stray animal or a drunk stumbling home. She turned back. And there, soaked to the bone, folded into himself against a concrete pillar, was a boy maybe 10, maybe 11, shivering so hard his teeth clattered. "Hey," she said gently, crouching down. "Hey, it's okay. Where's your family?" The boy flinched so violently at the word family that Ani immediately understood something was very wrong. "I won't hurt you," she said. "I promise. Look, I'm just going to put my coat on you, all right? You're freezing." He didn't answer. He didn't run either. That was enough of an answer for her. She could have called the police. Later, she would ask herself 100 times why she hadn't. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something in the way the boy's eyes darted toward the road every few seconds, like he expected headlights to come sweeping around the corner any moment. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just that nobody had ever done for her what she was about to do for him, and some old ache in her chest wouldn't let her walk away. She brought him home. Her apartment was small, one room, a hot plate, a mattress on the floor, but it was warm. And it was hers. And for one night, it became his too. She fed him instant noodles and let him wrap himself in her only blanket. She didn't ask his name again. She didn't ask anything. She just let him sit in silence until, somewhere near midnight, he finally spoke. "They're going to kill him," the boy whispered. Ani froze. "Kill who?" The boy's eyes welled up, but he shook his head hard, like the words physically hurt to say. I can't tell you. If I tell you, they'll come for you too." Ani's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "Nobody's coming for anybody tonight. You're safe. Get some sleep." He didn't sleep. Neither did she. At 3 a.m., the door of the apartment building's stairwell exploded inward. Ani shot up, throwing herself instinctively between the boy and the door as 4 men in black filed into the narrow hallway, weapons half raised, eyes scanning with the cold precision of people who had done this before. At the front of them stood a man who didn't look like the others' sharper suit, sharper face, a stillness to him that was somehow more frightening than the guns. "Don't move," Ani said, arms out, shielding the boy completely. "Don't you dare come near him." The man in front raised a hand, and the others stopped instantly. He studied her for a long moment, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. "You have no idea who you're protecting," he said quietly. "I don't care," Ani snapped, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out. "He's terrified. Whatever this is, It can wait until he's not shaking like a leaf. The man's jaw tightened. Behind him, one of his men muttered something in rapid Korean, a warning. A question. Ani couldn't tell. The man in the suit held up a hand again, silencing him without even looking back. "My name is Choi Ji-hoon," he said. "That boy is my nephew. He was taken from my house 6 hours ago. I don't know who you are or why you have him, but I am going to need you to step aside." Ani didn't move. "Prove it." Something flickered across Ji-hoon's face, not quite respect, not quite anger. Behind her, the boy's small hand gripped the back of her shirt. "It's all right," Ani murmured to him without turning around. "You know him?" A pause. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, Uncle Ji-hoon. The tension in the room didn't break so much as shift. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly and lowered his weapon, gesturing for his men to do the same. "Thank you," he said to Ani, though it came out stiff, like gratitude was a language he rarely practiced. "For keeping him safe." "I didn't know who he was," Ani said. "I would have done it for anyone." Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed slightly, like he was recalculating something. "That's either very admirable," he said, "or very foolish. In my world, those two things get people killed." He stepped forward to take the boy, and for one brief moment, small fingers tightened around Ani's wrist, refusing to let go. She crouched to his level. "You're safe now," she told him softly. "I promise." The boy searched her face like he was trying to memorize it. Then, slowly, he let her hand go. Ani thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. 3 days later, a black car was parked outside her apartment building when she came home from work. The window rolled down. Ji-hoon sat inside, alone this time, no guards flanking him. "Get in," he said. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," Ani replied, walking faster. It wasn't a request. His voice wasn't harsh, but there was something underneath it, an authority that made even strangers stop and listen. 5 minutes. Then I'll leave you alone. I give you my word." Ani stopped, hand tightening around her bag strap. Every instinct told her to keep walking. But there was something in his tone, not quite a threat, more like a man carrying a weight he didn't know how to put down. She got in. "I looked into you," Ji-hoon said without preamble as the car pulled away from the curb. "Your work history, your finances, your family back in Lagos." He watched her reaction carefully. "I do this with everyone who touches my family. It's not personal." "Feels personal," Ani said flatly. "I found something," Ji-hoon continued, ignoring the jab. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old, creased photograph, handing it to her. "Recognize him?" Ani's breath caught. The man in the photo was younger, dressed in a plain work jacket, standing beside an older Korean man in front of a warehouse she didn't recognize. But that face she would know anywhere, in any decade, in any faded photograph. "That's my father," she whispered. "Your father," Ji-hoon said slowly, "once saved my father's life. 1998, an arms deal that went wrong, very wrong, bullets everywhere. Everyone assumed my father wouldn't make it out of that warehouse. A Nigerian security contractor pulled him out through a service exit under fire and got him to a hospital before disappearing entirely. My father spent years trying to track him down to repay the debt. He never could." Ani's hands were trembling around the photograph. "He never told us this. He never told anyone. He said he left that life behind after Korea. He said," her voice cracked. "He said it changed him." "It probably did," Ji-hoon said quietly. "Men don't walk through fire and come out the same." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city blurred past the windows, gray and rain-slicked. "So what does this mean?" Ani finally asked. "It means," Ji-hoon said, "that whether either of us wanted it or not, our families were tied together before you or I were born. And 3 nights ago you protected the last of my bloodline without knowing any of it." He looked at her, and for the first time, Something like warmth broke through the ice in his expression. That is not a debt I take lightly. Ani shook her head. I don't want anything from you. I know, Ji-hoon said. That's exactly why I trust you. He dropped her back at her apartment. She thought that would be the last of it. It wasn't. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window with her father's old photograph in her hands, turning it over and over, trying to reconcile the quiet, gentle man who'd raised her with the stranger in that faded picture, the one who'd walked into gunfire and pulled a bleeding man out of a warehouse without a second thought. She remembered small things now, things she'd never questioned as a child. The way he flinched at fireworks, the way he never let anyone stand behind him at a doorway, the way he used to say, the people who need saving the most are usually the ones nobody wants to save, and she'd never understood what he meant until now. She called her mother that night, voice trembling. Mama, did you know Papa worked for a family in Korea? A powerful one? There was a long silence on the line before her mother finally spoke. He told me never to speak of it. He said it followed men their whole lives if they let it. Why are you asking me this now, Ani? Because it found me anyway, Ani whispered, whether he wanted it to or not. Her mother's voice cracked. Then be careful, my daughter. Whatever your father ran from, he ran because it nearly cost him everything. Ani didn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the fear in Dae-jun's eyes under the overpass, and wondering how deep the roots of this world really went, and how far they might reach before they were done pulling her in. 2 weeks passed, quiet and uneventful, or so it seemed. Ani went back to her usual routine, cleaning the Han residence, sending money home, trying to convince herself the storm-soaked night under the overpass had been some strange dream. But the boy, his name, she'd learned, was Dae-jun, began appearing at her building after school, sitting on the front steps until she came home, refusing to say why. You should be with your family, she told him the third time it happened. They're busy, Dae-jun mumbled. Uncle Ji-hoon has meetings all day. Nobody talks to me like you do. Ani's chest ached at that. She recognized loneliness when she saw it. She'd worn it herself for years. All right, she said finally, sitting beside him. Tell me about your day. It became a routine neither of them planned. Dae-jun would show up, and Ani would listen. And slowly, the boy who hadn't spoken a full sentence that first rainy night began to laugh again. Ji-hoon started showing up too first to collect his nephew, then staying longer each time, standing awkwardly by the door, watching the two of them with an expression Ani couldn't quite read. You're good with him, Ji-hoon said one evening, watching Dae-jun show her a drawing. He needed someone to just listen, Ani said. Not interrogate, not investigate, just listen. Ji-hoon's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I've been told I'm bad at that. You don't say, Ani replied dryly, and for the first time Ji-hoon actually laughed short, surprised, like the sound had escaped before he could stop it. Those evenings became something Ani looked forward to more than she wanted to admit. There was a rhythm to them, Dae-jun's chatter filling the small apartment, Ji-hoon standing stiffly by the door at first, then eventually sitting, then eventually staying long after Dae-jun had fallen asleep on her mattress. The two adults talking quietly over cups of tea, neither of them finished. Can I ask you something? Ani said one such night, watching steam curl up from her cup. Why does a boy that young flinch at the word family? What happened to him before all this? Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. His parents, my brother and his wife, died 2 years ago. Car accident, officially. Unofficially, it was a message from a rival family that got out of hand. Dae-jun was in the back seat. He survived. They didn't. His voice went flat, controlled in the way of someone who'd rehearsed saying this without breaking. Since then, he's been raised by guards and schedules. Not exactly a childhood. Ani's chest tightened. That's not living. That's surviving. In my world, Ji-hoon said quietly, sometimes that's the best you can offer someone. It shouldn't be, Ani said. Not for a child. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. You say things like that so easily. Like the world actually owes children softness. It does, Ani said simply, whether it pays up or not. He didn't answer that night. But the following week, he started arriving earlier, staying longer, asking Dae-jun questions about school instead of only security reports. Small things. But Ani noticed. It should have stayed simple. It didn't. One night, Dae-jun mentioned something in passing that made Ani's blood run cold. The bad men, he said, tracing a finger over his drawing. One of them had a voice like Mr. Bayek. Ani's hands stilled. Who's Mr. Bayek? Mrs. Han's driver, Dae-jun said. He used to pick me up sometimes when I visited the house before. He always smelled like cigarettes. Ani sat very still. Mrs. Han, her former employer, before she'd left that household 2 years ago under circumstances she rarely spoke about. She remembered Bayek clearly, a quiet, watchful man who never quite met your eyes. She told Ji-hoon that same night. His expression went stone cold. Are you certain? I'm telling you what he told me, Ani said. I don't know if it means anything. It means everything, Ji-hoon said grimly. The Han family has been circling my territory for months. If Bayek was involved in the kidnapping, it wasn't random. It was targeted. And if it was targeted, he stopped himself, jaw tightening. Then it's not over, Ani finished quietly. No, Ji-hoon said. It's not. Over the following days, the temperature in the Choi household changed. Guards doubled at every entrance. Ji-hoon grew distant, distracted, spending long hours behind closed doors with his advisors, voices occasionally rising loud enough for Ani to hear fragments through the walls when she came to pick up Dae-jun from school on his behalf. Words like territory and retaliation and proof drifted out into the hallway, sharp and clipped. Is he going to be okay? Dae-jun asked her one afternoon, small hand tightening around hers as they walked. Uncle Ji-hoon seems angry all the time now. He's not angry at you, Ani said gently. He's scared. Grown-ups get scared too. They just hide it differently. Are you scared? Dae-jun asked, looking up at her with an honesty only children seem to manage. Ani hesitated. A little, she admitted. But I'm more scared of what happens if people like me stop showing up for people like you. So I'm staying anyway. Dae-jun considered this for a long moment, then nodded, like it was the most reasonable thing he'd ever heard. If you're still watching up to now, type I'm enjoying it in the comments section. The investigation moved fast after that. Ji-hoon's people confirmed within days that Bayek had indeed been seen near the kidnapping site the night Dae-jun was taken. But before they could move on that information, something else happened, something that turned Ani's world upside down entirely. She was let go from the Han residence without warning, escorted out by security while Mrs. Han watched from an upstairs window, expression unreadable. 2 days later, a folder of evidence surfaced within the Choi organization text messages, supposedly from Ani's phone, coordinating drop-off times and locations with an unknown contact the night of the kidnapping. A witness, paid and coached, claimed to have seen her meeting with Bayek days before Dae-jun disappeared. It was a lie, every piece of it. But lies, delivered with enough polish, don't need to be true, they only need to be believed. Ji-hoon's inner circle turned on her almost overnight. Men who had nodded politely to her weeks earlier now looked at her like she was a threat to be neutralized. Even Ji-hoon, though he didn't fully believe it, couldn't ignore the pressure mounting from every side, his advisors demanding he cut ties, his own people whispering that trusting an outsider so quickly had been reckless from the start. I need you to stay away, Ji-hoon told her, voice tight, eyes refusing to meet hers. Just until this clears up. You think I did this, Ani said, disbelief cracking her voice. After everything, I don't know what to think, Ji-hoon admitted, and the honesty of it was almost worse than an accusation. But I have a family to protect, and right now the evidence points at you. Convenient evidence, Ani snapped, that showed up exactly when someone needed me removed from this house. Ji-hoon said nothing, and in his silence, Ani understood she was on her own now. Uncle Ji-hoon, she wouldn't. Dae-jun's voice cut through the tension, small and fierce, as he appeared in the doorway, having clearly heard more than anyone realized. She saved me. She didn't do this. Dae-jun. Go to your room, Ji-hoon said, his voice tight. No. The boy shouted, tears springing to his eyes. You believed the bad men's lies before. You're doing it again. That's enough, Ji-hoon snapped, sharper than he meant to, and immediately regretted it as Dae-jun flinched and went silent, staring at the floor. Ani crouched down before the boy could retreat further, gently tilting his chin up. Hey, look at me. Whatever happens, this isn't your fault. And it isn't your uncle's fault either. Sometimes the truth just takes time to catch up to the lies. Can you be patient for me? Just a little longer? Dae-jun nodded, though his lower lip trembled. Ani stood, forcing her voice steady even as her heart cracked. Take care of him, she told Ji-hoon quietly. Whatever you think of me, at least do that. I always intended to, Ji-hoon said, and for a flicker of a second, something almost like regret crossed his face. But it wasn't enough to stop her walking out the door. She left that night with nothing but her bag and a fury burning hotter than her fear. If someone wanted her gone badly enough to fabricate all of this, then someone was still afraid of what she might find. And that meant she was closer to the truth than anyone realized. She started digging on her own, calling old contacts from her time at the Han residence, piecing together fragments: a housekeeper who mentioned Baek's sudden disappearance, a security guard who recalled a black car returning to the property at odd hours in the days before the kidnapping. Slowly, a picture began forming, and it wasn't Baek alone. Baek was a driver. Baek took orders. Someone above him had orchestrated everything, and that someone had access close enough to the Choi household to know Dae-jun's exact schedule, security patterns, even the location Ani would take him if he ever escaped and needed shelter. That last detail stopped her cold. Whoever planned this knew about me, knew about my apartment, before that night ever happened, which meant the leak wasn't outside the Choi family, it was inside. She thought back through every interaction of the past 2 months, searching for anything she might have missed. A conversation overheard, a face that lingered too long, a question asked too casually to be innocent. And slowly, uncomfortably, pieces began sliding into place. She remembered a dinner 3 weeks earlier, before any of this had gone wrong, when a senior Choi advisor had asked her, almost in passing, where exactly she lived, what floor, which entrance, whether the building had security cameras. At the time, she'd assumed it was standard vetting, the kind of question a protective household might ask about anyone spending time around their heir. Now it felt different, deliberate, a man gathering information for a plan that hadn't happened yet. She also remembered the scar, Park's scar, thin and pale along his jawline, the kind that came from a blade rather than an accident. She'd noticed it the very first week, when he'd stood a little too close during a family gathering, his eyes lingering on Dae-jun a beat longer than courtesy required. She'd dismissed it then as simple attentiveness, a guard doing his job. She understood now it had been something else entirely. A man studying his target. The old fear tried to creep back in the instinct to run, to disappear, to let this world that was never hers close over her head like water. But underneath the fear was something sturdier now, something that had been growing since the night under the overpass. She thought of her father, walking into gunfire for a stranger and never once regretting it enough to speak of it again. She thought of Dae-jun's small hand refusing to let go of hers. Whatever this family's danger was, she was already too far inside it to pretend otherwise. She needed proof, and she needed it before the ceremony, or none of what she'd pieced together would matter to anyone. Ani thought of every face she'd seen in Ji-hoon's household over the past weeks, the advisors, the guards, the household staff who came and went with quiet efficiency. And then she remembered something small, something she'd nearly forgotten, a scar along the jawline of one of Ji-hoon's senior men, a man named Park, who always seemed to linger a little too long near Dae-jun during family gatherings. She remembered his voice, low and clipped, and something about the rhythm of it that had bothered her without her understanding why until now. It was the same rhythm as the man who'd barked orders in the shadows the night she found Dae-jun, right before the first black car had screeched away. She needed to get back inside. And she was running out of time, because that same week, Ji-hoon's household was preparing for one thing, Dae-jun's formal reinstatement ceremony. A public event meant to reassure the entire syndicate that the heir was safe and the family's grip on power remained unshaken. She tried calling Ji-hoon twice. Both calls went straight to voicemail. On the third attempt, a message came back not from him, but from an unknown number. Stop digging. You don't know what you're stepping into. Some debts get people killed twice. Her hands shook reading it, but underneath the fear was something harder, something that had been building since the night under the overpass. She wasn't a woman who scared easily anymore. Seoul had tried to grind that out of her for 4 years, and it hadn't worked yet. She thought about walking away. She thought about it seriously, packing her bag, calling her mother, booking the first flight she could afford back to Lagos, letting this world that was never hers to begin with swallow itself whole without her in it. But then she thought of Dae-jun's small hand gripping her sleeve in the rain, of his voice saying, "Nobody talks to me like you do," and she knew she couldn't live with herself if she ran now and something happened to him, because she'd been too afraid to finish what she started. If someone wanted to finish what they'd started, that ceremony crowded, chaotic, full of unfamiliar faces was the perfect opportunity. Ani had no invitation, no allies inside, no proof that would hold up against fabricated evidence. All she had was a memory of a scar and a voice, and the terrifying certainty that nobody else would piece it together in time. She went anyway. The ceremony was held in a grand hall on the top floor of a hotel the Choi family quietly owned, filled with dozens of guests in formal dress, security stationed at every entrance. Ani, dressed plainly, slipped in through a service corridor she remembered from delivering groceries weeks earlier, heart hammering against her ribs with every step. Inside, the hall glittered with the kind of quiet, controlled wealth that made her stomach twist crystal glasses, hushed conversations, men in tailored suits who all seemed to know exactly where the exits were without ever looking at them. A string quartet played softly near the stage, and for a strange, disorienting moment, none of it looked like the world of guns and blood she'd been dragged into weeks earlier. It looked civilized. That was almost worse. Ani had learned enough by now to know that civilized was often just violence wearing better clothes. She scanned the room, pulse hammering, searching every face for the one that mattered. A guard near the service door noticed her and started forward, hand rising to his earpiece, and Ani knew she had seconds, not minutes, before she'd be intercepted and thrown out before she ever got close enough to warn anyone. She spotted Dae-jun first, standing beside Ji-hoon near the front of the hall, dressed in a small suit, looking overwhelmed by the crowd. And then she spotted Park, moving along the edge of the room with quiet purpose, his hand resting inside his jacket in a way that made every nerve in Ani's body scream danger. She didn't think. She ran. Ji-hoon. She shouted, shoving through the crowd, ignoring the security guards who lunged to intercept her. Park. Watch Park. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards moved toward her, toward Park, toward the stage, all at once a tangle of confusion, and shouted Korean. Park's calm mask shattered the moment he realized he'd been made. He lunged toward Dae-jun, grabbing the boy's arm hard enough to make him cry out. Let him go. Ani screamed, breaking free of the guard restraining her and throwing herself forward. Stay back. Park snarled, pulling a weapon, dragging Dae-jun toward the service exit. Nobody move, or the boy dies right here. The hall went silent except for Dae-jun's terrified breathing. Ji-hoon stood frozen, every instinct warring against the gun pointed near his nephew's head. The room stayed frozen, guards fanned out in a wide circle, weapons drawn but useless with Dae-jun so close to the muzzle of Park's gun. Somewhere near the back, a woman screamed and was quickly hushed. Ji-hoon's hand hovered near his own weapon, but he made no move to draw it, his eyes locked entirely on his nephew's terrified face. "Park," Ji-hoon said, voice deadly calm despite the fury blazing behind his eyes. "Whatever they promised you, it isn't worth this." "You have no idea what they promised me," Park spat. 15 years of loyalty, and I was still nothing but hired muscle to your family. The Hans offered me a seat at their table. A real one. "So you sold a child," Ani said, stepping forward slowly, hands raised, voice steady despite the terror clawing up her throat. "For a seat at someone else's table. Stay out of this," Park growled, gun swinging toward her briefly before returning to Dae-jun. "I can't," Ani said. "I already tried to stay out of it once. Remember the rain? Remember the overpass? I found him because someone like you left him there to die in a storm rather than risk being caught. I'm not walking away this time either." Something in Park's expression flickered not doubt exactly, but hesitation, a crack in his resolve. His grip on Dae-jun loosened just slightly, and the boy's tear-filled eyes darted toward Ani, silently pleading. 15 years, Ani pressed on, taking another slow step forward, hands still raised. 15 years of loyalty, and one bad night convinced you it meant nothing. But I've known this family 2 months, Park. 2 months. And I already know Dae-jun deserves better than being used as a bargaining chip by people too much of a coward to fight this out honestly. "Shut up," Park barked, but his voice cracked on the words, the gun trembling slightly in his grip. "You don't want to do this," Ani said, softer now. "I can see it. You're not a killer, Park. You're a man who got desperate and made a terrible choice. There's still a difference between those two things, but only if you put the gun down right now." That was all Ji-hoon needed. He moved fast, faster than a man in his position should have been able to, closing the distance and driving Park's gun arm upward just as it fired, the shot burying itself harmlessly in the ceiling as guards swarmed forward. Dae-jun broke free, sprinting straight into Ani's arms as chaos erupted around them, security wrestling Park to the ground amid shouted orders and screaming guests. Ani held Dae-jun tightly, both of them shaking, as the hall slowly settled into stunned silence. Ji-hoon straightened, breathing hard, staring at Ani over his nephew's head, with an expression that held no trace of the suspicion from days earlier, only something raw. Something that looked almost like shame. "I doubted you," he said quietly, once the room had cleared enough for words to matter. "I let them convince me you were the threat, when you were the only one who never stopped protecting him." "You were scared," Ani said simply. "I understand scared. That's not an excuse," Ji-hoon said. "I should have trusted what I already knew about you." Ani looked down at Dae-jun, still clinging to her side, and felt something in her chest finally loosen after weeks of holding it tight. "Then trust it now," she said softly. Ji-hoon nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes, the beginning of an understanding neither of them had words for yet. In the days that followed, Park's confession unraveled the rest of it. The Han family's involvement confirmed beyond doubt. Their attempt to fabricate evidence against Ani exposed for exactly what it was. Mrs. Han's operation collapsed within the week, her territory absorbed, and her name whispered afterward only as a warning to others who might try the same. The syndicate's suspicion toward Ani evaporated as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by something far more complicated. Respect, gratitude, and in Ji-hoon's case something that had started as duty and slowly become something else entirely. He found her a week later, back in her small apartment, packing the last of her things into a single bag. uncertain of what came next now that the danger had passed. "You're leaving," he said from the doorway. Not quite a question. "I don't know," Ani admitted, not turning around. "I don't really belong in your world, Ji-hoon. I never did. I just got pulled into it because I stopped to help a boy in the rain." "That's not true," Ji-hoon said, stepping inside. "You belong wherever Dae-jun feels safe. And these past weeks, that's been wherever you are." Ani finally turned to face him, throat tight. "And what about you? Where do I belong to you?" Ji-hoon was quiet for a long moment, searching for words that clearly didn't come easily to a man who'd spent his whole life guarding them. "My father spent 20 years trying to repay a debt he never got the chance to settle," he said finally. "I don't want to spend 20 years doing the same thing. I don't want you to be a debt I owe, Ani. I want you to be someone I chose, separate from all of it. If you'll let me." Ani felt something crack open in her chest, warm and terrifying all at once. "That's a big thing to ask a maid you nearly had thrown out of your family." "I know," Ji-hoon said, the faintest smile finally breaking through. "I'm asking anyway, not as an apology, not as a debt repaid, just as a man standing in a doorway, hoping the answer is yes." Dae-jun appeared in the doorway behind him, having clearly been listening the whole time, grinning from ear to ear. "Does this mean you're staying? For real this time?" Ani laughed despite herself, wiping her eyes. "Looks like it." Dae-jun crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her waist, and for the first time since the night under the overpass, Ani let herself believe that maybe this wasn't a debt at all, and had never really been one, just two strangers who chose each other in a storm and kept choosing each other long after the rain stopped. So here's what this story really comes down to. Ani never asked who Dae-jun was before she helped him. She didn't check his family name, his bloodline, or what he could offer her in return. She simply saw a frightened child in the rain and chose kindness without conditions. And that single choice pulled her into a world of danger, betrayal, and buried family history she never saw coming. The lesson underneath all of it is simple, but easy to forget. The good you do without expecting anything back has a way of finding its way home to you, sometimes in the most unexpected, most powerful ways. Loyalty built on truth will always outlast loyalty bought with fear, and real trust, once broken, has to be rebuilt with honesty, not convenience. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you the way it moved us while creating it. Let us know in the comments what part you enjoyed the most, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one.